So, the whole concept of watershed health and bringing it to different areas, you were talking about comparing and contrasting. Can you talk about that a little bit more?
You know, yeah. Uh, Comparing and contrast. So virtually all my career has been putting the searchlight out and trying to come up with a story about how streams work. And the connectivity of things, the relationship of rivers to forests, rivers to floodplains, upstreams, connections to downstreams. And that served me very well. And you can take that understanding of rivers and streams and then put that into an application to help guide people to keep those connections. And those were they served me well from an intellectual point of view, and it was beautiful coming to places like this for the soul. And we got into this discussion now of watershed health, and I've always approached it more from standards of health as opposed to necessarily a process of healing, knowing that big, large-scale watersheds, if you were going to restore them, are going to take time. It's going to be opportunism. It's going to take a lot of relationship building among the people there to do it. One of the things that has happened in the last few years is I've ended up in a lot of cities and inner cities. And there, it's obviously I found the end point to watershed health. I mean, it's just quite the opposite. It's very unhealthy from any reference point I knew. And so I was groping around last night thinking about the subject, and was remembering a workshop I'd gone to with Elizabeth Cooper-Ross, who was very big on talking about different stages of death and dying. And the name of the seminar was Death, Dying, and Transition. And there were about 80 people there, and they all started to talk about reasons they were there and what they were doing. And there were obviously a lot of people that were suffering. Some were dying, some were Vietnam vets with traumas and were trying to become whole. Others were bipolar and it kind of switched around. Others had lost somebody or and hadn't dealt with grief. And then there were some very healthy people there too. And after 3 days of people crying and telling a story, the thing that struck me was that it didn't matter the circumstances surrounding the suffering, whether it was an abortion, was it a terrible accident, whether it was debilitating illnesses that they were struggling with at all. The pain and suffering was the same. It really didn't matter the circumstances, and it really didn't matter the politics of these people. The pain was the same. And so I started then to rethink what my standards were in this gorgeous old-growth forest. How does that translate to inner city Sacramento, which is not a bad place, to inner city LA, to the Hunter Bayview area of San Francisco, or Richmond, my home. And what I found was there's no way you're going to get back to any reference point I thought was healthy on connectivity. And so then the game became a relationship, and I think I can thank Mike Furniss for in his occasional notes to me always putting some little poem or saying. And he put one there by Gary Snyder: find your place on earth, dig in, and take responsibility for it. And so I've been looking at these efforts in the inner city of El Cerrito, and they've daylighted this stream. and so it can't spread around, although there are places they've allowed it to spread around in a park-like setting. And it's filled with garbage and at the end of the weekend shopping bags. And yet when you walk by and somebody stopped and they're looking at an egret, people want to know what they're looking at. And that egret then represents some step in the progress of moving towards a watershed health. It certainly is healthy for the soil. Do all those people in that shopping center care or stop? No, they don't. But if you get 5 or 6 people stopping and looking, more people start to look, or people stopping and picking up the garbage, more people look. And so it starts to build a sense of purpose, and it starts a healing process. So then you're then saying, well, whatever opportunity is there, you got to grab it. Or Arroyo Seco, here's a stream dribbling through a canal. A big canal, because it's there for moving floods out to the ocean. And they said, well, what would happen if in the summertime, or when there's no flood, if we let it go along and meander along, just go along the side of the canal? And they did. And so there's a half-mile reach in which this stream has got new trees around it. There's rushes. Dragonflies get up and chatter in your ear, defending their territory, reminding you you're glad you're not a mosquito. And people that are newly immigrants to LA feel safe. They walk their kids. It's free. There's there's a hopefulness that it brings. Rich people run around in their Nike outfits and looking good. Is it perfect? No. Is it a start and a fragment that's bringing a collective responsibility in that? Yes. And so I know that we're going to need standards, clean air, clean water kinds of standards, and those are national kinds of, and we're embedded in a governance of standards in some way. And yet the real work, the transformative work, which I think water is transformative. You wander around and it hits some object, moves around. It's magical. And I think people respond that way. And the hope is that you show the light more to this moving water, or allow you take the constraints off the water and let it do its thing in places where you can do it, that it helps transform. And then you can get into stories of how those streams work, or memories of what people remembered, and those become community spots that are on the road to health.
So it just seems like the task is so enormous, and there's small successes in each individual community. What can we do as a community of practitioners and scientists to blend all those small successes and get a larger movement going in this country?
Well, again, I think we get caught up in the frustrations of the length of time restoration takes, of obstacles to getting it done, funding, or getting governance groups lined up, or getting enough people involved. And yet when I look back over 30 years, I'm just astounded at the progress that is made. Is it fast enough? I don't think so. But is it in the right direction? Yes. As the idea that you could get 500 watershed councils that are actively communicating, and those are the ones that have kind of incorporated, and some of them have ball caps, some of them are stronger than others. The fact is, you've got more people rallied around that now than whenever I came into the field in the early 70s. So I say, hey, we are making progress, and that we just have to come back to a place like this to recharge, before we go back into some of the broken ones. But the fact that people can find joy in water running down a street gutter, and I did as a kid, and I didn't, you know, when it rained, and maybe in the inner city that's all they have, and yet, okay, so how do we kind of capture that so that it's just not an ephemeral event, but something they can see water running around all the time? Fountains have provided that. You know, how do we work around fountains? And so I think that it's time to get really creative with water, and we're not with places like in Oregon or the places like Freeman House studies or Dave Duncan. Those are in pretty good shape. Where 80% of the population lives, hey, these are never going to get as good as the damage shape that they're talking about. Now, should they stop? No, they shouldn't. And because they inspire us to do things, they give us hope about doing things. But I think that we try to jump to the whole big picture right away, and there are little things that do add up fairly quickly.
Mm-hmm. So you're talking about creating symbols of healthy watersheds in urban communities. And
building relationships or connections. And I think that was, and when we were talking at earlier Freeman House, he says, it's good to see you're going to a more relationship-oriented view of the world.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you were talking a little bit about new immigrants to the area and engaging them.
Yeah, I work and serve in an area that is the majority is non-white. The California, Hawaii, and the Pacific Islands, a huge diversity, over 100 different languages and cultures. And in the state of California, we're 50-50 between white Caucasian and a lot of those are new immigrants from Eastern Europe and Russia, but a tremendous influx of Hispanics and Asians that now make up the population. Okay, they come from a different relationship place in water and forests than what the whole movement in the last, through my lifetime, has been here in the U.S. They're going to be the leaders. They're going to decide what's politically important, what isn't politically important. And the connection with those and find out what gives them joy, what fulfills their soul, and how that connects with what we've got as we pass the torch on to what in many ways we view as new arrivals. Some of them have been here for a few generations, and we still pretend like they're new arrivals. But I think it's going to be an important challenge, and one that, particularly along the Pacific Rim, and many loci on the Eastern Rim, that we're going to have to work with. If the statistics are close, that most people go and recreate within a quarter to a half mile of a water body, there'd be an ocean, a lake, or a river, then I think that understanding how they view those and how we do, what's the reciprocity of blending of the values, is going to be very important to the health of the watershed 50 years from now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as a veteran practitioner, how do you disseminate your understanding of water and streams to kind of younger people that are starting out in the sciences?
Well, it's interesting, and I've been doing some thinking about that, and I don't do the practitioner much anymore other than pick up garbage along my stream. But I had an opportunity recently to talk to a bunch of Smith Fellows from the Society of Conservation Biology, and these are young, early career scientists and I try to emphasize 2 points that set me on the career, and one of them was a article in Science, or was a letter to Science, called "Chaos in the Brickyard" in 1963 or 4, and it was railing against the fact that it used to be scientists had an idea of how the world works, and then they went out and found the bricks that they could build that edifice or change the blueprints. And that with the proliferation of new scientists in the 60s and 70s and new journals, that now everyone just building bricks. Nobody had a plan for how to use the bricks. People were publishing and counting them up on their resumes, and you didn't have a coherent story. And so what came through to me was a worldview story. You needed to try to work on that. The second one was in the early 70s. Robert MacArthur died, and Robert MacArthur had a huge impact on a whole bunch of things, on species selection and competitiveness and things like that, and community. And when you started to look at his record, he would not have survived in a peer-reviewed world. He was careless with facts. He didn't go into extensive literature surveys. He created a story, and he went out and tried to test the story. Well, he got most of his work published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Science, where an Academy member could just get it in there. And then he had the presence of mind to start the Princeton series, monograph series. So he would write there, and his papers were always torn apart in graduate. It was both inspirational and you could find a lot of mistakes in there, and he certainly exposed himself to that. But his point was, and I tacked it on the wall of our stream team in the mid-70s, that the gist of it is that it was inexcusable for something to come out of this lab that was deadly dull but correct, than interesting and had a few and not precise. And better to err on the interesting story, and that someone could contribute as much that way as just being very precise and very thorough and careful. And I thought, well, that fits me. I'm not very precise. I like to be accurate, but I'm not very precise. And so I use that as a way to get young scientists to think about the story. What is their worldview? Because that's really what you're trying to impart to the public. And science at its best is storytelling. The good scientists can tell a great story, and you're mesmerized by that story. And so that leads me here to groups like the Reflections group, where these are great storytellers, and you just stand. I feel very intimidated and very grateful you could be in their presence and grab a phrase and a thought from them. And then I noticed they're unabashed borrowers of everybody else's work too, and so I'm feeling much more at home here. But it's the storytelling, and that's what I think that they ought to focus around. It isn't just a highly technical paper or a brick, but they ought to have a worldview and see if that fairy tale holds up.